Hello, everybody. Welcome to Bible class. We are studying the Sermon on the Mount, and we have now Matthew chapter 5, verses 31 and 32. All right, let's share the screen. There we go. I'm going to put myself right here. And okay, we have here, it has been said, whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement. But I say unto you that whosoever shall put away his wife, saving for the cause of fornication, causes her to commit adultery. And whosoever shall marry her that is divorced commits adultery. All right, so we have Jesus teaching on divorce. And this, along with the passage in Matthew chapter 19, which we'll also look at here, contain the exception clauses to divorce and remarriage. In the other passages that Jesus mentions, and we can check these out here. If you look up here, let me see. No. Yeah, there's that. Malachi, Luke 16. Whosoever puts away his wife. Yeah, Luke 16:18. Whosoever puts his wife away and marries another commits adultery, and whosoever marries her that is put away from her husband commits adultery. Mark also has this passage here, Mark 10:5-12. And it's very similar to what Matthew 19 says. Whosoever shall put away his wife and marry another commits adultery against her, and if a woman shall put away her husband and be married to another, she commits adultery. So those are similar passages in Matthew and Mark, but they don't have the exception clauses that Matthew 5:32 and Matthew 19:9 have. Matthew 5:32, but I say to you that whosoever shall put away his wife, saving for the cause of fornication, causes her saving for the cause of fornication. So there's that exception clause there. And then if we look at Matthew 19:9, I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, commits adultery, and whosoever marries her which is put away doth commit adultery. So those are the two passages. Those are the two passages with the exception clause. So let's do verse 31 first. It has been said, whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement. This is going back to Deuteronomy chapter 24, which gives the Old Testament law about this. And we can look at this. When a man hath taken a wife, and it hath come to pass that she find no favor in his eyes, because he has found some uncleanness in her, then let him write her a bill of divorcement, and give it in her hand, and send her out of the house. And when she is departed out of the house, she may go and be another man's wife. And if the latter husband hate her, and write her a bill of divorcement, and give it into her hand, and send her out of his house, or if the latter husband die, which took her to be his wife, her former husband, which sent her away, may not take her again to be his wife. After that she is defiled, for that is abomination before the Lord. And thou shalt not cause the land to sin, which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance. All right, so those are the Jewish laws concerning divorce, and we're not going to get too much into that. But we will just notice that, and under the Old Testament law, actually, it's different from the New Testament law in that she is not allowed to go back with her former husband after, because of that. And there's, we can discuss the reasons about that, but we're going to go and look into the New Testament reasons, or the New Testament law on divorcement, because Jesus is giving something different from the Old Testament law. So it's been said, and Jesus is actually quoting not what the rabbis said, but actually quoting what the law of Moses said. It's been said, whosoever shall put away his wife, let him give her a writing of divorcement. But I say unto you. And what Jesus is saying here is, even though it's in the law of Moses, Jesus does not approve of divorce. If you look over at Matthew 19, verse 8, they said unto him, why did Moses then command to give a writing of divorcement and put her away? And he saith unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, suffered you to put away your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. So Jesus says the law of Moses recognized that divorce happens, so he actually put these laws in place I believe that God put these laws in place to protect the woman when a divorce actually happened. But they weren't laws that, it wasn't a good thing. And divorce in those cases was not ever a good thing. Jesus here says from the beginning it was not so. It was not. He allowed you during Moses' time to do this. He allowed you to have a writing of divorcement, but it was because of the hardness of your hearts, and it's not an ideal thing. And I say unto you, in verse 9, and it's sort of the same thing here. You've heard it's been said, but I say unto you. So I say unto you. So he's adding to this, whosoever shall put away his wife except for fornication and shall marry another commits adultery. Whoso marries her which is put away doth commit adultery. So it's actually quite simple. And we analyze this because it's a tough law for a lot of people to follow. A lot of people, they don't want to follow this law. They feel like they can just get married as many times as they want. But Jesus is actually pretty strict about divorce. And if you look at Mark, the verses in Mark that we looked at, or the verses in Luke, they don't even mention the exception. Jesus just says, don't get a divorce. And if you do get a divorce, you're actually, what Jesus says here in Matthew 5, he says, whosoever shall put away his wife causes her to commit adultery. Now, let's say that fornication is not the reason for the divorce here. Well, he's a man who puts away his wife is causing her to commit adultery. Now, how does he cause her to commit adultery? Well, Jesus is understanding here that in this time, a woman who is divorced is going to go find another husband. So in that sense, he's causing her to commit the adultery. Adultery is a specific term. I do not believe that Jesus is talking here about some sort of covenant breaking. Some people will say that adultery is covenant breaking, but it's the act of adultery is one where men and women are intimate with each other in a sexual way. And when it's used in Scripture, when adultery is used in Scripture, it's either used of that kind of intimacy, or it's used metaphorically to talk about Israel's adultery, Israel's spiritual adultery with God. But, and as I was reading about this, one of the writers pointed out, and I think it's important to note this, that whether it's physical adultery, where a spouse is cheating on their husband, man or woman. A male or a female a man or a woman can cheat on their husband, and it can be adultery. Or the term could be talking about in the Old Testament, the term is used of spiritual adultery, where Israel cheats on God with another nation. It's worth noting there that in all the situations, there's always a third party involved, and it's always something that happens with a third party. So you're not just breaking an oath between two parties, but you have husband and wife, or spiritual husband and spiritual wife in the case of Israel and God. But you have husband and wife, and the wife or the husband, I guess, would commit adultery, and this adultery is an act that happens between somebody who is married and somebody who is not their spouse. That is the definition the definition of adultery. So adultery is a married person committing an act that is reserved only for marriage in God's eyes, but doing that with somebody who is not their spouse. And God does not give us permission to do that. He does not allow us to do that in any situation. The sexual act is reserved only for the marriage bed. Now, if we go over to Hebrews chapter 13 and we look at verse 4, marriage is honorable in all, and the bed undefiled. I believe the English Standard says, let marriage be held in honor and all, and the bed undefiled, but it's the same idea. But whoremongers and adulterers, God will judge. So this act of intimacy outside of the marriage bed is something that God is going to judge or condemn, but inside the marriage, it is something that is honorable and something that is undefiled. So we look and we see Jesus saying this, and Jesus says, whosoever puts away his wife except for the cause of fornication causes her to commit adultery. Now, if you think about the situation for women, it was tougher at that time, and to survive, a woman often had to be married and be a part of the family, because it was harder for her to hold a job. It was harder for her to build wealth and therefore survive in the world. Therefore, a man who divorces his wife is really not leaving her with many options. And a man who divorces his wife is sending her down a path where, to survive, oftentimes she's going to have to remarry. And that's why it says here in verse 32 that he causes her to commit adultery. Now, that doesn't mean that she is not responsible. That just means that the one who divorces his wife carries some of that responsibility because of, cause and effect, because he knows, because of what is going to happen. However, we also have this other phrase here, whosoever shall marry her that is divorced commits adultery. And the King James actually uses the term divorced. Forgive me while I switch this to check something. Apoluse, this word here, and this word here, apollelumenein, are the same root. Oftentimes the King James translates that divorce, or translates that put away. But I say unto you that whoever shall put away his wife apoluse, and whosoever shall marry her that is divorced, apolelumene, that other word that I looked at, those are the same word. They're just different forms because they're used in different ways in the sentence, but it's the same word. So put away and divorce is the same word, and we can look that up here in our KJV plus. Her that is divorced is apoluo, away, put away, release, let, send, release. We go to the dictionary here, the lexicon, to free fully, that is to literally relieve, release, dismiss, or figuratively let die, to pardon, or specifically, in this case, to divorce. So the word is not just used in reference to divorce, but in this context, that's what to put away means, to divorce. And it is that act of husband and wife separating with a legal reason, or separating legally. So it's not just where a husband or a wife, they decide to spend some time apart from each other. That's not what it's talking about, but it's talking about a husband putting away his wife. Whosoever shall put away his wife causes her to commit adultery. And then whosoever marries her that is put away or divorced in this commits adultery. The English Standard, let's see what that says. We can look and see ESV, and I like this actually, the way it translates here. Everyone who divorces his wife, and then whosoever marries a divorced woman. I like that, but I don't like the way the English Standard translates the word fornication to sexual immorality. I think it does a poor job there, because in English, sexual immorality is a broad term, and in the Greek it was a more restricted term. Fornication is a better translation of that. That is, it's a word that means, that's talking about a sexual act, not just any kind of sexual immorality. There is a specific, it's actually the act of intimacy, not just something that is something possibly tertiary to the act that is also immoral. Like, for example, looking at pornography. And that's, here up here he says, you've heard that it said, thou shalt not commit adultery, but I say unto you that whosoever looks upon a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. Well, one might make the argument that, well, if you've committed adultery in your heart, then anybody who looks at a woman to lust is eligible for being divorced, and is the guilty party as a divorce, is the guilty party, and can be put away for sexual immorality. But here in Matthew 5:32, when it says the cause of fornication, committing adultery with someone in your heart is not the actual act of adultery. It is just something that is in your heart, and it is not fornication like you have here in 5:32. And there you have to be, those distinctions between the terms are very important, because we're talking about lives here, and these sins are oftentimes, it's very difficult to undo these sins, and it's difficult to undo divorce, and living with the consequences of these things can be difficult. So we have to know what we're talking about here, and be sure. And I would say, if you're considering getting a divorce, make sure you know what the Bible says about it before you do, because you have to live with the result of your decision and what Jesus says after it. You don't want to just just cut off this relationship that you have with your spouse on a whim, or you don't want to cut off this relationship lightly, because you will have to, well, you're going to have to live with the consequences of your actions. And Jesus says very clearly that unless fornication is involved, and that is the actual intimate act involved, unless you catch somebody, unless a spouse catches their partner engaged in this act, or catches finds proof of this act, then, and is able to divorce their partner, male or female, is able to divorce their spouse because of this proven fornication, then you are, unless you're doing that, then it says you're causing her to commit adultery, and the one that marries her that is divorced commits adultery. Matthew 19:9 says it a little bit differently, and we'll look at that. Whosoever shall put away his wife and shall marry another commits adultery. So in Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, whosoever puts her away causes her to commit adultery. Why? Because, well, she's the one getting remarried in that situation. But here, he's the one that puts her away and marries another. Well, he's the one that commits adultery. So you have all the scenarios there. The one who divorces his wife and gets remarried, or the wife who is divorced and is remarried. Well, they're both committing adultery in these separate scenarios. Jesus doesn't approve of divorce because, well, God created male and female. And in Matthew 19, he actually says this. He says here, for this cause man shall leave father and mother, Matthew 19:5, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What God therefore has joined together, let not man put asunder. So God, when husband and wife are joined together in holy matrimony, they are joined together as husband and wife by God. They're not just joined together by their promises and by their vows, but it is God who puts husband and wife together. Therefore, let not man put that asunder. And it is more difficult to break that bond than just saying, I don't want to be your husband, or I don't want to be your wife anymore. You can't just express a desire not to be married and have it and make it so. And in fact, when the Bible says, whosoever shall put away his wife except for fornication and shall marry another commits adultery, or in Matthew chapter 5, I keep hitting the search button, but in Matthew chapter 5, whosoever shall put away his wife causes her to commit adultery. We go back to the definition of adultery, and we see that adultery is that act committed with somebody who is not your spouse. And it's something that a married person does with somebody not their spouse. Well, how do you commit adultery if you are divorced? Well, the only way that's possible is if that union hasn't been broken in God's eyes. So you have somebody who is divorced legally, somebody who has been given this writing of divorcement, but in God's eyes, man has not put that relationship asunder. Man has not divided that, and they're still united in God's eyes, even if they are in the eyes of the state living separately. So if you are married to somebody who is not your wife, or married to somebody who is not your husband, regardless, or depending on whether you're a man or a woman, and you divorce that person and get remarried, then you are the subsequent intimacy that comes from marriage is adultery, because that first union has not been split apart by God. And the only exception to that, the only thing that divides that union, is fornication, is that act of intimacy that somebody commits outside of the marriage. And it's that act of fornication which allows for that exception, allows an innocent family member to put away their spouse and then get remarried without committing adultery. That is the exception. But other than that, there is no exception to this. And Jesus says, whosoever shall put away his wife, saving for the cause of fornication, causes her to commit adultery. Whosoever shall marry her that is divorced commits adultery. And you say, well, that's terrible. And we need to look at what Jesus says in Matthew 19, because it's a difficult life after you've been divorced. And Jesus says here, his disciples say, man, in that case, it's if the case of the man be so with his wife, it's not good to marry. If that's the case, and Jesus says, all men cannot receive this saying, save they to whom it is given. For there are some who are eunuchs, that is, some who do not get to be intimate with another person, who are so born from their mother's womb, they are impotent. Some who are eunuchs, which were made eunuchs of men, they would remove that physical part that allows that. And there's some who are eunuchs which have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. That is, they are voluntarily celibate, voluntarily not entering into another relationship. And he's talking about people who have been divorced and are deciding to lead the single life because they do not want to enter into an adulterous relationship. People who are divorced, who have not been divorced for the exception of fornication, Jesus says they are the ones, they make themselves eunuchs for the kingdom's sake. And it is something that God expects from people and requires from people. And it is difficult. It's a tough thing not being able to live with a spouse. But this is something that Jesus teaches and that he expects from his followers. And this is something that he said here in Matthew 19, but also he said in Matthew chapter 5. And it should put in our mind that marriage is something that is serious, and it should be entered into only after a lot of thought and deliberation, because you need to know what you're getting into. This is a binding covenant between you and your spouse and God. The promise, the oath there happens horizontally, of course, but it also happens between man and between God, and you can't just break that off at a whim or because of something that is not fornication. So it may be a difficult teaching, it may be one of Jesus' more difficult teachings, but it is at the same time relatively simple in what Jesus says. So this is Jesus' teachings here in the Sermon on the Mount on divorce. And I probably have spent a bit more time than normal, and forgive me for that. I don't actually have my clock running. So if I went over the norm, well, it's because it was a subject that needed that amount of time to talk about it and to look at what Jesus was actually saying. We could probably spend a lot more time on this subject, but since we have only these 2 verses, and since we're finished with those 2 verses for today, we're going to pick up next time, Lord willing, with swearing oaths. and we're going to look at that. And I don't know if we can do the class justice with just the 2 verses. I don't know if how I'm going to divide this up, or if I'm going to divide this up at all. I'll get to that when I study it more. But until then, I hope everybody has a blessed day, and I hope you are all I hope you've gotten something out of this class. And until we meet again, may God bless you.